Full voiceover. Title: The rainy night I heard my family planning my accident. The night I learned my family was planning to take my house, I had gone downstairs to make tea for my mother. That is the part I still think about. Not the rain against the windows, not the thunder over the roof, not even the moment I heard my younger brother say that if I refused to sign the house over, they could make it look like an accident. What stays with me is that I was carrying a blanket. I had noticed my mother rubbing her hands together after dinner, and even though she had spent most of that evening pretending I did not exist unless she needed something, I still went upstairs, took the soft gray blanket from my room, and brought it down for her. Because old habits survive longer than love sometimes. I had been the daughter who noticed. The daughter who remembered medicine schedules, repaired loose cabinet handles, sent money quietly when bills were late, and swallowed insults because peace in a family can feel like something you owe everyone else. So I was holding that blanket when I stopped halfway down the stairs and heard my name. At first I thought they were complaining about me. That was normal. My mother, my uncle, my aunt, and my younger brother Caleb were in the kitchen. Their voices carried through the old heating vent beside the landing, the same vent that used to bring up the smell of my father's Sunday soup when I was a child. I could hear them clearly because the rain was loud enough outside that they thought the house was covering them. My aunt said I was stubborn. My uncle said stubborn people could be softened if they were frightened properly. Then Caleb said the house had to be his before the baby came, because a man with a family needed it more than a woman living alone. My mother did not defend me. She said I had always been difficult when it came to what was mine. That sentence cut deeper than the others because the house was mine in every possible way. My name was on the deed. My savings had rescued it twice. My hands had painted its rooms after my father died. My life had been folded into that place for years, while Caleb drifted in and out of jobs, debts, apologies, and excuses. Still, I did not move. Then my uncle asked what they would do if I refused. There was a pause, a long one. And Caleb, my baby brother, the boy I had packed lunches for when our mother worked late, said they would make it look like I slipped or fell or lost control of the car in bad weather. Something simple, something sad, something no one would question because everyone knew I had been stressed. The blanket slipped from my hands. It did not fall loudly. It just slid onto the stair behind me like a tired animal. I remember the sound of rain filling the silence around my body. I remember gripping the banister so hard my fingers hurt. And I remember realizing with a calmness that still frightens me that if I made one sound, if one stair creaked, if one breath escaped too sharply, the people in that kitchen would stop being careless. So I did not scream. I did not run into the kitchen. I did not accuse them. I did not ask my mother how she could sit there while her son discussed my death like a paperwork problem. I backed up the stairs one step at a time. Then I went to my room, took my coat, my phone, my father's old watch, and the folder where I kept the house documents. I climbed out through the small balcony door that stuck in winter, eased myself down the wet trellis like I was 17 again and sneaking out after curfew, and disappeared into the rain without turning on a single light. That was the last night I ever slept in my house as the person my family thought I was. Before that night, if you had asked me whether my family loved me, I would have said yes, not because they were gentle, not because they were fair, not because they made love easy to feel. I would have said yes because saying anything else felt too painful. My family had always been built around Caleb's needs and my responsibility. He was the youngest, the only son, the one my mother called sensitive when he was selfish and unlucky when he was careless. I was 4 years older, which in our house meant I was old enough to understand, old enough to help, old enough to forgive, and eventually old enough to be blamed for not giving more. When our father was alive, the imbalance had limits. Dad loved Caleb, but he saw him clearly. He saw the way Caleb could charm a room and empty a wallet in the same afternoon. He saw the little lies, the dramatic apologies, the way our mother rushed to protect him from consequences, as if consequences were a kind of weather only daughters should endure. Dad and I were close in a quiet way. We did not have long emotional talks. We fixed things together. He taught me how to shut off the water main, how to patch plaster, how to sand a door that swelled in summer. He said a home was not just walls, but care repeated so often it became shelter. The house on Alder Street was his pride. It was not grand. 2 stories, narrow porch, blue-gray siding, a stubborn old maple tree in front, and a kitchen floor that sloped slightly toward the back door. But to him, it was proof. Proof that a man who grew up with nothing could build something steady. Proof that family could have a place to land. When he became sick, I moved back in. At first, it was supposed to be temporary, just a few months after surgery, then a few more after treatment. Then, quietly, my life rearranged itself around the house. I worked remotely from the dining table. I drove him to appointments. I learned which foods he could tolerate, which pain medicine made him confused, which bills he had hidden because he did not want to worry me. Caleb visited when it suited him. He cried loudly in hospital rooms and disappeared when prescriptions needed picking up. He promised to help with repairs, then arrived 3 weeks later asking to borrow money. He called Dad his hero on social media, then forgot the follow-up appointment where Dad waited 2 hours for him before pretending he had not expected him. My mother said Caleb handled illness badly because he felt things too deeply. I handled illness well because no one gave me another choice. Near the end, Dad transferred the house fully into my name. The official reason was simple. I had paid the back taxes, refinanced the small remaining mortgage, and taken over every expense. The private reason was harder. He knew Caleb would sell it, not someday, immediately. He knew my mother would excuse it. He knew relatives would call it fairness. He knew I would be pressured to sacrifice because I had been trained to confuse sacrifice with love. So he made the decision while he still could. He told me the house was not a prize. It was a responsibility, and I had already been carrying it. When he died, I thought that decision would settle everything. I was naive. Grief does not soften greedy people. Sometimes it only teaches them which doors are unlocked. For the first year after the funeral, the pressure came dressed as concern. My mother said the house was too big for me. My aunt said it was lonely for a single woman. My uncle said property should stay in the male line, as if we lived inside a family tree drawn by someone from another century. Caleb said he and his wife Marissa needed stability before starting a family. I told them I understood. Then I told them no, not cruelly, not dramatically, just no. The house was my home. It was also the last place where my father's care still felt tangible. His pencil marks were still inside the pantry door from measuring our heights as children. His tools still hung in the basement. The maple tree still had the old scar from the summer Caleb crashed his bicycle into it and blamed me until Dad found the tire marks. I had earned that house through love and labor, but my family did not see labor when it came from me. They saw availability. The pressure grew sharper after Marissa became pregnant. Suddenly, every conversation had a moral weapon inside it. The baby needed a yard. The baby needed a stable address. The baby deserved family property. My mother said Dad would have wanted his grandson raised in that house, though she never mentioned that Dad had been the one to leave it to me. At first, I tried to stay patient. I suggested helping Caleb find a rental. I offered to contribute to a crib, a stroller, even a deposit if he found an apartment he could afford. But Caleb did not want help. He wanted ownership. More specifically, he wanted ownership without effort, without payment, without gratitude, and without consequences. The night it happened, I had invited them for dinner because my mother insisted we needed to talk as a family. I should have known that phrase was dangerous. In my family, as a family usually meant everyone had already decided what I should give up, and my role was to make the decision look voluntary. It rained all day. Hard, cold rain that turned the front walk slick and filled the gutters with leaves. I cooked because cooking gave my hands something to do. Roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, the lemon cake my father used to like. I set the table with the good plates, though I do not know why. Maybe some part of me still believed if I made things warm enough, they would remember how to be kind. Dinner was tense. Caleb barely ate. Marissa stayed home, which was unusual. My mother kept glancing toward my uncle. My aunt praised the house 3 times in a voice that made the praise sound like inventory. After dessert, Caleb began. He said he had been thinking about the future. He said the baby changed everything. He said it made no sense for me to live alone in a house with 3 bedrooms while he and Marissa struggled in a small apartment. I asked if he was asking to move in temporarily. His face hardened. He said temporary would not give his family security. My uncle added that a house should belong to the branch of the family that would continue the name. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because some insults are so old they arrive wearing dust. I reminded them that the house legally belonged to me. My mother said legality was not the same as morality. That sentence stayed with me too. People who benefit from documents respect legality. People blocked by documents suddenly discover morality. I said Dad made his wishes clear. Caleb said Dad was sick when he signed the papers. That was the first time my anger rose above my hurt. Dad had been sick, yes, but he had also been lucid, stubborn, and more aware than anyone wanted to admit. He signed those papers because he understood exactly what would happen after he was gone. I told Caleb not to use our father's illness to rewrite his choices. The room went quiet. Then my mother began to cry. Not quietly, not from pain, strategically. She said she had lost a husband, and now she was losing her daughter to greed. She said I cared more about walls than blood. She said she could not understand how I slept at night, knowing my brother's child might be born without a proper home. I did not answer the way I wanted to. I did not say that I had slept beside Dad's hospital bed in a plastic chair for 8 months, while Caleb slept just fine. I did not say that I had paid the mortgage while Caleb bought a new motorcycle. I did not say that if love were measured in property, they had all gone bankrupt years ago. I only said the answer was no. Dinner ended badly. They moved into the kitchen while I cleared the dining room, and after a while my mother claimed she felt cold. That was when I went upstairs for the blanket. That was when I heard them. For a long time after I escaped, I kept replaying the conversation, wondering if I had misunderstood. That is what betrayal does. It forces the victim to become the defense attorney for the people who harmed them. Maybe Caleb had spoken in anger. Maybe my uncle had meant scare me legally, not physically. Maybe my mother had stayed silent because she was shocked. Maybe I had heard the words wrong through the vent and rain, but deep down, I knew. You can misunderstand a sentence. You do not misunderstand the moment your body realizes it is in danger. I drove through the storm with no destination at first. My wipers could barely keep up. My hands slipped on the steering wheel because they were wet, and I did not know whether the water was rain or sweat. My phone buzzed 3 times before I turned it off. I did not go to the police right away. That is another truth people judge too easily from outside. When the danger is a stranger, the path seems clear. When the danger is your family, every step feels like betrayal, even when you are the one being betrayed. There is a part of you that still wants permission to survive. So I drove to the only person I trusted more than my fear. Mrs. Alvarez lived 3 streets away from my father's house. She had been our neighbor for 25 years, a retired paralegal with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a talent for knowing when children were lying before their own parents did. After Dad died, she brought soup every Friday, until I finally admitted I could cook for myself, then switched to bringing gossip because she said grief needed variety. When she opened her door and saw me soaked through holding a folder to my chest, she did not ask dramatic questions. She pulled me inside, locked the door, gave me a towel and made coffee so strong it could have revived the dead. Only after I stopped shaking did she ask what happened. I told her. Not all at once, in pieces. The dinner, the demand, the kitchen, Caleb's voice, the fake accident, my mother's silence, the rain. Mrs. Alvarez listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked older than I had ever seen her. Then she said the words I needed someone else to say. She said I could not go back alone. The next morning, she called a lawyer she trusted, a woman named Diana Wells, who specialized in estate disputes and elder family property cases. Diana agreed to see me before office hours. I sat across from her, still wearing Mrs. Alvarez's borrowed sweater, my hair damp from the rain, my house folder open on the table between us. Diana read quickly. Deed transfer, mortgage refinance, tax receipts, insurance records, Dad's final letter. My bank statements showing payments for repairs, utilities, medical expenses, and house costs. Then she asked if I had any recording of the conversation. I said no. Then I stopped. Because I remembered something. Before dinner, I had been recording a voice note on my phone about the oven timer and grocery list. It was a silly habit I used when cooking, talking into the phone so I would not forget things. I thought I had stopped it when guests arrived. My hand shook as I opened the app. The recording had continued, not clearly, not perfectly. It had picked up kitchen sounds, rain-muffled voices, and long stretches of nothing. But the part near the stairs was there. My aunt calling me stubborn. My uncle asking, what if I refused? Caleb saying there were ways to make an accident look natural. My mother saying my name afterward, not in horror, not in protest, but in a low, warning voice, telling him not to speak so loudly. Diana's face changed as she listened. Mrs. Alvarez crossed herself. I sat very still. It is one thing to remember danger. It is another to hear it prove itself. Diana told me we would move carefully, not emotionally, carefully. She made copies of every document. She preserved the audio file. She advised me to file a police report. Not because the police would immediately arrest my family, but because an official record mattered if anything happened later. She also told me to change the locks, install cameras, notify my insurance company that no one else had permission to access the property, and update my emergency contacts and medical authorization. The list felt strangely practical for something so horrifying. But practical steps saved me. That was the first lesson after the rain. Panic is real, but paperwork can become armor. We filed the police report that afternoon. The officer who took it was kind, but cautious. Family threats were complicated, he said. The audio was concerning, he said. They would document it, he said. If I felt immediately unsafe, I should not return to the property without support. Concerning. That word felt too small. But the report existed. My family did not know that. For 3 days, I stayed with Mrs. Alvarez. During those 3 days, my phone filled with messages. At first, they were angry. Caleb demanded to know where I went. My mother said I had embarrassed her by disappearing during a family conversation. My aunt said dramatic behavior would not solve anything. My uncle told me to stop acting like a victim. Then the messages softened. My mother said she was worried. Caleb said we should talk calmly. My aunt said everyone had said things in frustration. My uncle said he could help mediate. Then came the guilt. My mother said she had not slept. Caleb said Marissa was crying because the stress could hurt the baby. My aunt said my father would be ashamed of me for turning my back on family. They did not know I had heard enough to stop believing the softer version. On the 4th day, Diana arranged for a locksmith and security installer to meet us at the house, while 2 police officers stood by for a civil standby. That phrase sounded absurdly polite, but it meant I did not have to walk into my own home alone. The house looked innocent when we arrived. Rain-washed porch, maple leaves stuck to the steps, curtains still drawn from the night I left. My mother's car was gone. Caleb's truck was gone. The kitchen light had been left on. Inside the place smelled faintly of lemon cake and cold coffee. That nearly broke me. Danger should leave a smell of smoke or blood, something obvious. Instead, my home smelled like family dinner. The blanket still lay on the stair. I picked it up and held it for a moment before putting it in a trash bag. Not because the blanket had done anything wrong, because I could not bear to see the version of myself who had carried it. We changed the locks, added cameras at the front porch, back door, driveway, and hallway. Diana photographed every room in case anyone later claimed I had damaged or removed property. Mrs. Alvarez packed a bag of clothes for me because my hands had become useless by then. In my father's study, I found something I had forgotten, a small metal file box. Dad had kept warranties manuals, old tax returns, and the kind of receipts only men who fix things themselves believe will someday matter. I opened it, looking for the furnace paperwork, and found an envelope with my name on it. Not family, not house papers. My name. Inside was a letter from Dad, dated 3 months before he died. I sat at his desk and read it while Diana waited in the doorway. He wrote that if I was reading the letter, it meant he was gone, and the house had probably become a battlefield. He said he was sorry for not protecting me sooner from the kind of love that only flowed one way. He said he had put the house in my name because I had already made it a home, and because Caleb would mistake inheritance for rescue. Then he wrote something that made me cover my mouth. He had added a clause to his estate documents stating that if I died under suspicious circumstances before a certain period had passed, any remaining interest from his estate that might have gone to relatives would instead go to a local housing charity he trusted. The house itself was mine, but he had made sure no one could profit from harming me through his remaining assets or old insurance. My father had seen the danger before I did, not the exact plan, not the rainy kitchen, but the pattern. He had known love could become entitlement in the wrong hands. For the first time since I escaped, I cried without fear. I cried because my father had believed me before I knew I needed believing. That letter became the center of my strength. My family had spent years treating me as if my boundaries were selfish inventions. Dad's letter reminded me they were not. They were survival. After the locks changed, Diana sent formal notices. My family was not permitted to enter the property without my written consent. Any attempt to pressure me to transfer the deed would be documented as harassment. All communication about property matters had to go through counsel. The response was immediate. My mother called Diana greedy and cruel. Caleb said I was letting outsiders poison me against blood. My uncle threatened to contest the deed. My aunt claimed the audio recording was illegal, though Diana was not impressed by legal opinions delivered in all capital letters. Then Caleb made his first real mistake. He came to the house at midnight. The cameras caught him clearly. His truck pulled up without headlights. He walked to the back door carrying a flashlight and what looked like a small pry tool. He tried the old key. It did not work. He tried the side window. That did not work either. Then he stood in the rain looking up toward my bedroom window, and for one moment his face was not angry. It was confused, as if the house had betrayed him by obeying me. The security company called me. I called the police. Caleb was gone before they arrived, but the footage was saved. The next day he sent a message saying he had only come to check whether I was safe. At midnight, with a tool, at the back door. That was when something in me finally changed. Until then, a part of me had still been grieving the family I wished I had. After the footage grief began making room for clarity. They did not want peace. They wanted access. Access to the house. Access to my guilt. Access to the version of me who could be cornered, shamed, frightened, and persuaded to sign away what my father had protected. Diana filed for a protective order. My mother reacted as if I had attacked her. She left a voice message crying that I was destroying the family. She said Caleb was under pressure. She said men said foolish things when desperate. She said no one would actually hurt me. No one would actually hurt me. That sentence made me sit down because it meant she had heard enough to know what actually referred to. It meant the threat was not imaginary. It meant her defense was not that I misunderstood, but that I was supposed to trust the people discussing my accident not to follow through. I did not respond. Silence had saved me once. Now it became my boundary. While the legal process moved forward, Diana began investigating the pressure around Caleb. What she found made the story uglier and more ordinary at the same time. Caleb was in debt. Not just behind on rent, not just careless with credit cards. Deep debt. Gambling debt. Personal loans. A failed business investment he had hidden from Marissa. A lien threat on his truck. He had promised people money he did not have, and somewhere along the way the house on Alder Street had become his imaginary solution. He had already spoken to a real estate agent. He had asked about selling quickly after a family transfer. He had printed blank deed forms. He had even told one lender he expected to control a property within the month. The house was not about the baby. The baby was the excuse. That discovery hurt in a different way. Not because it surprised me, but because it made the cruelty practical. They had wrapped greed in family language, but underneath it was simple desperation and entitlement. Caleb had made promises with my life as collateral. The protective order hearing happened 3 weeks after the rainy night. I had never been in court before. The room felt both ordinary and terrifying. Fluorescent lights, wooden benches, people whispering into paperwork. My mother sat beside Caleb, wearing black like she was attending a funeral. My aunt and uncle sat behind them. Marissa was not there. Diana sat beside me with a folder so organized it seemed to have its own moral authority. When my family looked at me, I felt the old pull. Do not make this worse. Do not embarrass us. Do not tell strangers our business. That pull had ruled my life for years. But then Diana placed my father's letter on the table, and I remembered that privacy had been the hiding place where they sharpened their knives. The audio recording played in court. Not loudly, not dramatically. The quality was rough rain and kitchen noise mixed with voices. But the important words were clear enough. The room went still when Caleb's voice described an accident. My mother lowered her eyes. My uncle stared straight ahead. Caleb's attorney tried to argue that the words were frustration, exaggeration, family conflict taken out of context. Diana then presented the midnight footage, the messages demanding the house, the printed deed forms, the real estate inquiry, and the debt records tied to Caleb's expectation of a quick sale. A single threat can be explained away by someone determined enough. A pattern is harder to bury. The judge granted the protective order. Caleb was ordered to stay away from me and the property. My mother was included because of the recorded conversation and repeated pressure. My uncle received a warning tied to harassment. The matter of possible criminal threats was referred for further review. It was not a movie moment. No one shouted, no one confessed, no one was dragged away. But when the judge spoke, I felt something inside me settle. For the first time, a room outside my family had listened to the truth and not asked me to make it smaller. Outside the courthouse, my mother tried to approach me. An officer stopped her. She looked offended, then wounded, then old. For 1 second, I wanted to comfort her. That was the most dangerous second of the day. Then she said, loud enough for me to hear, that I had chosen a house over my own mother. I turned around. Not fully, just enough to answer. I told her she had chosen a house over her daughter first. Then I walked away. That sentence was the closest I came to revenge. The real justice came later, and it came through consequences, not speeches. Caleb's debts surfaced publicly during the property dispute. Marissa found out he had lied about their finances, lied about the house, and lied about why I had disappeared that night. She called me once, crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said Caleb told her I had promised to give them the house, then changed my mind out of spite. He had never told her about the dinner demand. He had never told her about the recording. He had never told her about the accident threat. I expected to hate her. I did not. She was not my enemy. She was another person Caleb had built a false future around. I sent her Diana's contact information and told her to protect herself and the baby. That was all. A month later, she moved in with her sister. Caleb blamed me, of course. Men like Caleb often mistake exposure for sabotage. He believed I ruined his marriage because I revealed the lies he used to build it. He believed I destroyed his future because I refused to be the foundation under it. But the law continued moving, slowly, imperfectly, the way law often moves when family violence hides behind property disputes and polite last names. Caleb was charged with attempted unlawful entry and later faced additional investigation over threats and fraud-related documents. My uncle's involvement became harder for him to deny after messages surfaced showing he had helped Caleb contact someone about creating leverage over me. My aunt retreated into silence. My mother moved in with a cousin and began telling relatives I had been brainwashed by lawyers. Some believed her, some did not. That is another grief people do not warn you about. When you tell the truth about your family, you also learn which relatives preferred the lie because it was easier to organize dinners around. I lost people I had known my whole life, but I also gained a quieter kind of peace. The house changed after that. At first, I could barely sleep there. Every creak sounded like a warning. Every car slowing outside made my body tense. I kept lights on in rooms I was not using. I checked the cameras too often. I locked doors, then checked them, then checked again. A home can become a crime scene, even when no blood is spilled. Mrs. Alvarez understood. She came over every morning for 2 weeks and drank coffee at my kitchen table until the house remembered conversation. Diana recommended a counselor who specialized in family trauma, and for once in my life, I accepted help without turning it into a task I had to earn. Healing was not dramatic. It was changing the curtains because my mother had chosen the old ones. It was repainting the guest room yellow because Caleb had once said it should be a nursery for his child. It was replacing the stair runner where the blanket had fallen. It was learning to sit in the kitchen during rain without hearing voices through the walls. One Saturday, I opened every window and cleaned the house from top to bottom. Not because it was dirty, because it had held too much fear. I found old things everywhere. Dad's pencil behind the workbench, a recipe card in his handwriting, a cracked mug Caleb had given him as a child, my mother's sewing kit. Family is complicated that way. Even after betrayal, objects remain innocent. They still carry love from before people chose what they chose. I kept some things. I let others go. In the basement, I found the small wooden toolbox Dad used when teaching me repairs. Inside was a note I had written at 12, promising to become assistant manager of fixing stuff. Dad had written underneath it in his careful block letters, "Already promoted." I laughed so suddenly it became a sob. Then I carried the toolbox upstairs and put it in the hall closet where I could reach it. The house was still mine, not just legally, spiritually, practically. Mine to repair, mine to protect, mine to fill with people who did not treat love as a transaction. Months passed. The maple tree turned gold, then bare. Winter came. The first snow softened the porch where Caleb had stood that midnight, trying his useless key in the rain. I thought that memory would always hurt sharply, but over time, it became less like a wound and more like a scar I could touch without bleeding. The criminal case moved in pieces. Caleb took a plea on some charges, others remained under review. He was ordered into counseling, debt treatment, and probation. He lost access to me, the house, and the fantasy that his problems could be solved with my surrender. My mother never apologized. For a while, I waited, not because I needed her apology to know the truth, but because some childlike part of me still hoped there was a mother inside her who would wake up horrified by what she had allowed. Instead, she sent letters. The first was angry. The second was wounded. The third was religious. The fourth said, "She forgave me." That one made me laugh for the first time without sadness. I put the letters in a box and stopped reading new ones. Forgiveness, I learned, is not the same as reopening the door. 1 year after the rainy night I invited people to dinner, not my family, by blood, my real people, Mrs. Alvarez. Diana, who said lawyers did not usually attend client dinners, but made an exception for lemon cake. Marissa came too, with her baby daughter, because healing sometimes creates unexpected bridges when the same lie hurts more than one person. Denise from my office came with flowers. A neighbor brought bread. Someone spilled wine on the tablecloth. The kitchen became loud in a way that did not frighten me. It was raining again, not violently like that night, just steady rain soft against the windows. At one point, I stepped into the hallway and looked at the stairs. For a second, I saw myself there from a year earlier, frozen, barefoot, holding a blanket, listening as the people who should have protected me planned how to erase me. I wanted to reach back through time and tell that version of myself she was not cowardly for leaving quietly. She was wise. There are moments when survival does not look brave from the outside. It looks like silence. It looks like retreat. It looks like walking away without the final word. But sometimes the quiet exit is the line between becoming evidence and staying alive to tell the truth. I returned to the kitchen and watched Marissa's baby sleep in a basket near the radiator, tiny fists curled under her chin. For a moment I thought of the argument Caleb had used the baby as a reason I should give up my home. And there she was, innocent of all of it, sleeping peacefully in the house he had nearly destroyed trying to claim. That was the strange mercy of the ending. The house did become a place of shelter for a child, just not through theft, not through fear, not through my disappearance, through truth. Later, I made a decision my father would have understood. I updated my will and created a small trust. If anything ever happened to me, the house would not go to relatives who measured love by entitlement. It would support a local program helping women leave unsafe family situations. Not because I wanted to turn my pain into a grand gesture, but because I knew what it felt like to stand in the rain with nowhere safe to go except the kindness of someone who believed you. Mrs. Alvarez cried when I told her. Then she pretended she had dust in her eye and criticized my coffee to restore balance. Life became ordinary again, but differently. I still worked, still paid bills, still forgot laundry in the washer sometimes, still argued with the old kitchen drawer that stuck whenever it rained. But the old guilt no longer sat at the head of every table. When my phone rang and my mother's name appeared from a new number, I did not answer. When relatives sent messages saying enough time had passed, I did not explain. Time does not turn a threat into a misunderstanding. When Caleb wrote through his attorney asking to retrieve childhood items from the house, Diana arranged a supervised pickup. I did not attend. I did not need to see him carry out trophies and old jackets to prove I had moved on. One afternoon, months later, I found the gray blanket in the garage. I had forgotten I never threw it away. It was still in the trash bag, folded badly, smelling faintly of dust and detergent. I stood there, holding it for a long time. Then I washed it. I dried it in the sun, and I gave it to Mrs. Alvarez's old dog, who accepted it with more gratitude than my mother ever had. That felt right. Not everything from a terrible night has to remain terrible forever. Some things can be washed, repurposed, given to gentler lives. But some things cannot. I will never again pretend that blood is enough. Blood can connect people. It cannot excuse them. It cannot demand your home, your safety, your silence, your inheritance, your body, or your future. It cannot turn greed into need. It cannot turn threats into frustration. It cannot make betrayal holy because it happens around a family table. A home is not just a building. It is the place where your nervous system learns whether it can rest. For years, my house had held everyone else's needs. My father's illness, my mother's grief, Caleb's excuses, relatives' opinions, family history, family debt, family expectation. After the rain, It finally began holding me. That is what I want people to understand. Leaving quietly did not mean I was weak. Staying silent in that moment did not mean I had no words. It meant I understood that the people in the kitchen had already decided my voice did not matter. So I saved it for a room where it would. For the police report, for the lawyer's office, for the court, for the new life I built after I stopped begging dangerous people to love me safely. If you have ever overheard the truth by accident, you know there is a terrible second when your old life is still standing, but you can already see the crack running through it. You know that strange calm that comes before panic when your body understands faster than your heart. Trust that moment. Trust the part of you that goes quiet because it is trying to keep you alive. And if the people who should love you start speaking about your home, your money, your body, or your future as if you are an obstacle instead of a person, believe what they reveal when they think you cannot hear them. I once thought the worst thing that could happen was losing my family. I was wrong. The worst thing would have been losing myself to keep them. The rain that night did not wash my family away. It washed the illusion away. It showed me who was willing to protect me, who was willing to use me, and who had been standing nearby all along, waiting for me to knock on the right door. My father used to say, a house remembers the hands that care for it. I believe that now. The house on Alder Street remembers him in the workbench, the pantry marks, the maple tree, and the sloping kitchen floor. It remembers me in the paint, the locks, the repaired stairs, the yellow guest room, the dinners filled with safe laughter. It remembers the night I left through the rain, not as the night I lost my family, but as the night I finally chose my life. And sometimes when rain taps softly against the windows, I still pause halfway down the stairs. Not because I am afraid, because I am listening, not for danger anymore, for peace. The night their love almost ended, nobody cheated. That was the part that made it so painful. There was no dramatic betrayal,
I'm sorry,
no
I can
secret
explain.
hotel room, no message that
He was already
explained
exhausted
everything
before
in
the
one
argument even
cruel
began.
sentence. There was only a cold dinner on the table, a phone face down beside
The
a
soup is
plate,
cold.
a woman trying not to
I know.
cry, and a man standing in the doorway with rain on his jacket, already exhausted before the argument began. People like to
Please.
imagine love
Look at
breaks
me.
because of one terrible
Please.
moment. Sometimes it does, but more
Remember me.
often love begins to crack in smaller
Love didn't
ways.
disappear all at
A
once.
message answered too
It
late,
slowly forgot
a
how to
tired
recognize
voice
itself.
mistaken for indifference,
Just
a promise
one more week.
forgotten because work
Fear
ran
made him
long,
available to
a
everyone,
joke that lands on
except
an
the
old
person
wound,
waiting at home.
a hand not held because both people
Tell me how you did
are
this
waiting
piece.
for the other
Tell me how you
to
created
reach
this
first.
piece.
That was how it happened
Sometimes
to Mira
loneliness doesn't
and
ask for
Jonah.
romance.
Not all at once.
This piece holds sadness
Not loudly
without
at
asking for
first.
pity.
Their love did not collapse like a house struck
It was
by
exactly
lightning.
the kind of thing
It
Jonah
eroded
used to notice.
like a path under quiet rain, one small misunderstanding at a time,
Maybe we need time
until the
apart.
ground beneath them was softer
Maybe we
than
do.
either of them realized.
I didn't need
And by the time
perfection.
someone else
I needed
came
to feel
along and
remembered.
started speaking to Mira
never
with
stopped
the
loving
attention
you.
she had
I
been
only forgot
starving
how to show
for,
it.
the real question was no longer whether she still loved Jonah. She did. The question was whether love, after being neglected in small, ordinary ways, could still recognize itself before loneliness accepted another voice. When Mira first met Jonah, he was the kind of man who noticed details. That was what made her fall for him. Not his smile, though his smile was warm. Not his job, though he was responsible. Not the way he looked in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, though she would later admit that helped. It was the umbrella. They met outside a bookstore during a sudden summer storm. Mira had been carrying a paper bag full of secondhand novels and one sketchbook she could not afford, but bought anyway because the cover felt like a promise. The rain came down so hard the gutters overflowed. People rushed into shops, laughed under awnings, cursed the weather, called rides. Mira stood there with her books pressed to her chest, watching the rain soak the sidewalk, trying to decide whether the sketchbook was worth sacrificing her dignity for. Jonah, a stranger, then stepped beside her and held out half his umbrella without saying anything clever. He did not ask where she was going. He did not make a joke about fate. He did not turn kindness into performance. He simply noticed she needed cover. They walked 2 blocks together under that umbrella, shoulders almost touching, while the city blurred around them. At the corner, Mira thanked him and expected the moment to end. Instead, Jonah asked whether the sketchbook was for serious art or for pretending to be serious in coffee shops. She laughed before she could stop herself. 3 months later, she knew the exact sound of his footsteps outside her apartment door. 1 year later, his toothbrush was in her bathroom. 3 years later, they lived together in a small apartment with uneven floors, too many mugs, and a balcony where Mira grew herbs badly, and Jonah pretended not to notice she killed basil every spring. Their love was never perfect, but it was alive. They had rituals, Sunday pancakes, even when the pancakes were terrible. Voice notes during lunch breaks. A jar on the kitchen shelf where they dropped tiny paper notes about good things they did not want to forget. A rule that whoever got home first made tea. Another rule, more serious, that they would never go silent just to punish each other. For a long time they kept those promises. Then life became heavier, not in one cinematic tragedy. In the ordinary way, life often becomes heavy when no one is looking. Jonah's company entered a difficult year. Projects were canceled. Teams were reduced. Every Monday, someone else disappeared from the office chat. He began working later, not because he loved the job more than Mira, but because fear made him available to anyone who needed one more thing. He did not tell her how afraid he was. He told himself he was protecting her from stress. Mira's freelance illustration work became unstable at the same time. A publisher delayed payment. A client canceled a project after weeks of revisions. Her mother's health needed more attention. Bills arrived on schedule even when money did not. She began feeling like she was asking for too much whenever she needed comfort. So she did what people with old abandonment wounds often do. She pretended she needed less. At first, the changes were tiny. Jonah stopped sending lunch voice notes every day. Mira told herself he was busy. Then he stopped noticing when she wore the earrings he once said made her look like sunlight. She told herself that was childish. Then he forgot to ask how her client meeting went. She told herself he had his own problems. Each time she swallowed the hurt before it became a sentence. But swallowed hurt does not disappear. It waits. Jonah on his side noticed Myra becoming quieter. She laughed less. She answered his tired questions with short replies. When he came home late, she said it was fine in a voice that did not sound fine. When he tried to explain work, her eyes drifted away, and he felt judged before she said anything. He began staying at the office a little longer because home had started to feel like a place where he was failing. That was the cruel loop. She felt abandoned, so she became colder. He felt accused, so he withdrew. His withdrawal confirmed her fear. Her coldness confirmed his. Neither of them meant to hurt the other. That almost made it worse. Because when someone hurts you on purpose, anger gives you a clean place to stand. But when the person you love hurts you through fatigue, fear, pride, and silence, you can spend months arguing with yourself about whether your pain is valid. The first serious fight happened over a forgotten dinner. Mira had cooked because Jonah had promised 3 days earlier that Friday night would belong to them. No laptops, no work messages, no half-listening. Just dinner music and the silly card game they used to play when they were too broke to go out. She made his favorite soup, the one with mushrooms and white pepper. She bought bread from the bakery near the station. She lit 2 candles, even though she felt foolish doing it. At 8, he texted that he was leaving soon. At 9, he said a meeting ran over. At 10, his phone went silent. By the time he came home, the candles had burned low, and the soup had formed a skin on top. He arrived exhausted, soaked from rain, carrying the frightened energy of a man who had spent the evening trying not to lose his job. He began apologizing before he removed his shoes. He said there had been an emergency with a client. he said he could explain. Mira heard only that the dinner had not mattered enough for a phone call. She said it was fine. Then she picked up the bowls and poured the soup into a container without looking at him. Jonah would later say that was the moment he felt locked out of his own relationship. She would later say that was the moment she felt invisible in her own kitchen. The argument started small, as most dangerous arguments do. He said she could at least look at him while he apologized. She said he could at least mean an apology before expecting forgiveness. He said she always assumed the worst. She said he always gave her material. Then the old wounds arrived wearing new clothes. She said he made time for everyone except her. He said nothing he did was ever enough. She said she was tired of begging for basic care. He said he was tired of being treated like a disappointment the moment he walked through the door. Both of them said true things in unfair ways. That is how love wounds itself. The next morning, they moved around the apartment carefully, like people avoiding broken glass. Jonah made coffee for two. Mira thanked him without warmth. He left for work. She stayed home and cried in the shower, where the water could cover the sound. For 2 days, they were polite. Politeness can be more frightening than anger in a relationship. Anger still reaches. Anger still says somewhere underneath, you matter enough for me to fight badly. Politeness steps back. Politeness begins practicing absence. After that fight, every small mistake grew larger. Jonah forgot to replace the milk. Mira took it as proof he never noticed what they shared. Mira did not answer his message for 4 hours. Jonah took it as punishment. Jonah came home and went straight to shower without kissing her. Mira took it as rejection. Mira mentioned an old friend who had complimented her work. Jonah heard comparison. Neither asked what the other meant. They only reacted to what fear translated. Then came Adrian. Adrian was not a villain. That mattered. He was not waiting in shadows to destroy their relationship. He was not manipulative, not cruel, not secretly plotting to steal Mira away. He was simply there at the wrong time with the right kind of attention. He owned a small framing shop beside the art supply store where Mira bought paper. He had gentle hands, silver at his temples, and the calm patience of someone who spent his days protecting fragile things behind glass. Mira first spoke to him when she brought in a print for a client. He noticed the composition, asked about her process, and listened to the answer as if every word deserved room. Mira left the shop feeling strangely lighter, not in love. Not tempted yet, just seen. That is how dangerous loneliness can be. It does not always ask for passion first. Sometimes it only asks for a witness. A week later, she returned with another print. Adrian remembered her name. He remembered the subject of the last illustration. He asked whether the client had liked it. Mira felt a small ache in her chest because Jonah had forgotten to ask the same question. She told herself it meant nothing, and it did mean nothing, until it began meaning something. Meanwhile, Jonah had his own mirror. At work, a colleague named Sophie started checking on him after late meetings. She was direct, funny, and unafraid to tell him when he looked like he had not slept. She did not carry the history Mira carried. She did not hear his explanations through months of disappointment. When he said he was tired, Sophie believed only that he was tired. That felt easier, not deeper, easier. Love with history is rich, but it is not always light. Sometimes a stranger's kindness feels cleaner because it has no memory attached. Jonah never crossed a line with Sophie. Mira never crossed one with Adrian. But emotional distance does not begin at the line. It begins when you start taking the softest parts of yourself somewhere else, because home no longer feels safe enough to hold them. The second major fight came from a photograph. Mira had a small exhibition with other local artists. Nothing grand. A community gallery, cheap wine, white walls, nervous artists pretending not to watch people react to their work. But it mattered to her. It was the first time in months she had felt proud of something. Jonah promised he would come. He meant it when he said it. Then work collapsed again. A crisis meeting. A client threatening to pull out. His manager asking him to stay because he was the only one who understood the old system. Jonah looked at the time again and again, telling himself he could still make the last hour. He did not. Mira spent the evening glancing toward the door. Each time someone entered, her heart lifted before embarrassing her by falling. Adrian came by to see the print he had framed. He said her piece held sadness without begging for pity. It was exactly the kind of comment Jonah used to make back when he still looked closely. By the time Jonah texted that he was sorry, the exhibition was almost over. Mira did not answer. Later that night, Jonah saw a photo online. Mira standing beside Adrian, both holding plastic cups, her face softer than it had looked with him in weeks. Something ugly moved through him. Not because the photo proved anything, because it proved she could still look that alive. When he came home, she was sitting on the couch with her shoes still on, too tired even to be dramatic. He apologized. She said he had missed it. He said he tried. She said trying did not put him in the room. He said she seemed to have company. She stared at him, then shocked by the accusation beneath the words. The fight that followed was worse than the first, because now jealousy had entered, and jealousy is fear wearing armor. He said Adrian looked comfortable. She said at least Adrian showed up. He said that was unfair. She said so was waiting all evening for someone who kept choosing work. He said he was trying to keep them financially stable. She said she never asked him to disappear in order to provide. He said she made him feel like a failure. She said he made her feel single while still in a relationship. That sentence landed hard. Jonah did not shout after that. He went quiet, and this time the silence was not a pause. It was a wall. They slept in the same bed that night, facing opposite directions, separated by 8 inches of mattress that felt like a continent. In the morning, Jonah said maybe they needed time apart. Mira wanted to say no immediately. Pride spoke first. She said maybe they did. So Jonah packed a bag and went to stay with his brother. The apartment changed shape after he left. Myra had thought space might feel peaceful. Instead, everything became too loud. The missing shoes by the door, the extra mug unused in the cabinet, the silence where his keys should have landed, the balcony herbs leaning toward the sun, still dying, still ridiculous. On the first night alone, she ate crackers for dinner and hated herself for missing someone she was angry with. On the second night, Adrian messaged her. He said he hoped the week was being kind to her and that the exhibition piece had stayed with him. It was a simple message. Respectful. Warm. Mira stared at it for a long time. This is where stories often become cruel to women. They pretend that the moment another man speaks kindly, she becomes unfaithful. But life is more complicated than that. Mira did not want to betray Jonah. She did not want a secret romance. She wanted to feel for 5 minutes like her feelings did not arrive as an inconvenience. She replied carefully. She thanked Adrian. She said the week had been difficult. She did not mention Jonah by name. Adrian did not push. He only said, difficult weeks deserve tea and decent company, if she ever wanted either. Mira placed the phone face down. Her heart was not racing with excitement. It was aching with hunger. That frightened her more. At his brother's apartment, Jonah was not doing better. He slept badly on a narrow couch and checked his phone too often. He drafted messages to Mira and deleted them. He imagined her with Adrian, then hated himself for the imagination. Sophie texted once to ask if he was okay after leaving work early. He almost told her everything. Then he stopped. Not because Sophie was dangerous, because he realized he was about to hand a private wound to someone who did not have to live with its healing. Instead, he opened the old, shared photo album on his phone. There was Mira on their first winter trip, wearing his scarf and laughing because she had slipped on ice but refused help out of pride. Mira asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest. Mira holding up a burnt pancake like a trophy. Mira painting the balcony railing while Jonah stood behind the camera telling her she had missed a spot. He had not forgotten loving her. He had forgotten how to show it while afraid. That difference mattered. On the 4th day apart, Mira found the jar of notes. It was behind a stack of cookbooks, dusty, half-forgotten. Their old good things jar. She took it down without thinking and opened one folded paper. Jonah's handwriting. Mira laughed at my terrible mushroom joke, even though it deserved silence. Another. She looked tired today, so I made tea before she asked. She smiled with both eyes. Another. He remembered my father's appointment and put it in his calendar because he said my worries should not have to travel alone. Mira sat on the kitchen floor and read until the room blurred. The notes were not proof that the current pain did not matter. They were proof that the man she was angry with had once known how to love her in the language she understood. Then she found one in her own handwriting. Jonah gets quiet when scared. Do not mistake every silence for leaving. She covered her mouth because she had written that herself 2 years earlier after he admitted how his parents' divorce had taught him to disappear emotionally before conflict could abandon him first. She had known. Then life got hard and she forgot. Or maybe pain made forgetting easier. The next morning, Mira messaged Jonah. Not a long speech, not an accusation. She asked if they could talk on Sunday properly without trying to win. Jonah replied after 12 minutes. He said yes. Those 12 minutes felt like a trial. Sunday arrived with rain. Of course it did. Not dramatic rain, not storm rain. Just steady gray rain, sliding down the windows, the kind that made the apartment feel smaller and more honest. Jonah arrived at 3. He looked tired. Mira probably did too. For a moment they stood in the doorway like people meeting after a long trip, unsure whether they still belonged to the same language. Then Mira stepped aside. He removed his shoes. That small, familiar act nearly undid them both. They sat at the kitchen table because the couch held too many memories of avoiding each other. Mira had made tea. Jonah noticed. This time, he said thank you. This time, she let the words land. They agreed on one rule. No defending in the first round. Whoever spoke first would be heard all the way through. Mira started, because if she did not, she feared she would lose courage. She did not begin with Adrian. She did not begin with the exhibition. She began with smaller things. She told Jonah about the lunch messages disappearing, the forgotten client meeting the nights she waited to tell him something, and watched him open his laptop before asking about her day. She told him about the dinner, the soup, the candles, how foolish she felt sitting there at 10 o'clock with bread growing cold while telling herself not to be needy. She said she did not need him to be perfect. She needed to feel remembered. That word changed Jonah's face. Remembered. Not entertained, not worshipped, not rescued. Remembered. Mira continued slowly now because the truth was becoming less angry and more vulnerable. She told him that when he missed the exhibition, it did not hurt only because he was absent. It hurt because her work already felt fragile, and his absence seemed to confirm the fear that her dreams were optional in the life they were building. Then she spoke about Adrian. She said he had been kind. She said his attention had felt good because she was lonely. She said nothing had happened, but she would be lying if she pretended the attention had not mattered. Jonah looked down. His jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. Mira said the most frightening part was not Adrian himself. It was how easy it had been to imagine telling him things she had stopped telling Jonah. That sentence sat between them. Jonah breathed through it. Then he spoke. At first his voice was careful. He told her about work, but not the surface version he had been giving for months. He told her about the layoffs, the fear, the way every late meeting felt like one more test he could not fail. He told her that when he came home and saw disappointment on her face, he did not hear a partner asking to be loved. He heard a verdict that he was failing everywhere. He said he stayed longer at work, partly because work needed him, but partly because home had begun to feel like another place where he could not catch his breath. Mira closed her eyes. That hurt. Not because he blamed her, but because she could recognize the pattern. Her pain had made home sharper. His fear had made him absent. Each had become the weather the other was trying to survive. Jonah said he knew he had neglected her. He did not excuse it. He said providing had become his hiding place, because if he could say he was doing it for their future, he did not have to admit he was terrified of losing his present. Then he spoke about Sophie. He said she had been kind, too. He said he had almost told her more than he should have, not because he wanted her, but because she had no history with his failures. He said that scared him, because easy comfort could become dangerous if you kept returning to it instead of repairing what mattered. Mira nodded. For the first time in weeks, neither of them was pretending only one person had been lonely. That was the beginning of honesty. Not the apology. Not yet. Honesty. They talked for hours. Not smoothly. Not beautifully. There were moments when Mira became defensive. Moments when Jonah misunderstood. Moments when both needed to stop, breathe, and try again. But they kept returning to the same question. What did you feel underneath what you said? Under Mira's anger was fear that she was becoming invisible. Under Jonah's withdrawal was fear that he was already failing and would be abandoned once she noticed. Under her sarcasm was a plea. Under his silence was panic. Under both of them was love, bruised but not dead. At one point, Mira read from the old notes in the jar. Jonah laughed softly at some and cried at one he had forgotten writing. The note said, "I want to be the place she can rest, not another thing she has to carry." He covered his face then. Mira reached across the table. Not all the way at first, just enough for her fingers to rest near his. He took her hand like someone being allowed back into a room he thought he had lost. But taking a hand is not the same as solving a relationship. They knew that now. So they became practical. Mira said she did not want promises made only in emotion. Jonah agreed. They wrote things down not as contracts, but as reminders for when fear got loud again. No phones during planned dinners unless there was a real emergency. And if an emergency happened, the person who was late had to communicate before silence could create a story. One night a week for honest check-in, not about chores, but about how they were actually doing. No using fine as a hiding place. No punishing with silence. No taking emotional intimacy to someone else before bringing the truth home. No pretending work stress or creative stress excused neglect. And perhaps most important, no waiting until resentment became fluent. When something hurt, they would try to name it while it was still small. That last one felt almost impossible. Both of them knew it. Small hurt is embarrassing to speak. It feels petty. It feels needy. It feels safer to wait until it becomes large enough to justify. But by then the hurt has collected evidence, built an argument, and hired pride as its lawyer. They promised to try anyway. As evening fell, Adrian messaged Mira. Her phone lit up on the table. Jonah saw the name. So did she. The room went still. This was the moment that would have become an explosion 2 weeks earlier. This time, Mira picked up the phone, read the message, and placed it between them. Adrian had asked if she was okay, and whether she still wanted tea sometime. Mira looked at Jonah. Then she answered honestly. She thanked Adrian for his kindness and told him she was working through something important with Jonah and that she needed to keep the right boundaries while she did. No drama, no accusation, no secret. Just a door gently closed before it became an escape route. Jonah's eyes filled, but he did not celebrate. He understood this was not proof he owned her. It was proof she was choosing honesty, and that choice deserved respect, not triumph. Then he took out his own phone and showed her the message from Sophie he had not answered yet. He wrote back with the same care, thanking her for checking in and saying he needed to handle things at home directly. Both phones went face down after that. The apartment felt different, not fixed, honest. That night, Jonah did not move back in. That was Mira's idea, and it was a wise one. Old patterns love rushing back through familiar doors. They needed repair to be chosen slowly, not assumed, because they had cried at the kitchen table. So Jonah returned to his brother's place for 2 more weeks. During those 2 weeks, they practiced. That is the unromantic part of saving love. Practice. Jonah called when he said he would. Mira told him when she felt anxious instead of pretending she was fine. He came to her next small art event early and stayed through the awkward cleanup afterward. She asked about his work fear without turning it into a complaint. He admitted when he was overwhelmed before disappearing into silence. She apologized when sarcasm slipped out sharper than she intended. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but sincerely. There were setbacks. One Thursday, Jonah forgot to respond to a message for 6 hours, and Myra felt the old panic rise. She almost punished him with coldness. Instead, she sent a second message saying she knew he was probably busy, but the silence was touching an old fear. Jonah called within 10 minutes. He did not say she was overreacting. He said he understood why it hurt, explained what happened, and thanked her for telling him before resentment wrote the rest of the story. Another time, Myra canceled dinner because she was exhausted after visiting her mother. Jonah felt rejected and almost hid it. Instead, he told her the cancellation had made him feel unimportant, even though he knew that was not her intention. Mira did not call him needy. She invited him over for tea and sweatpants, and let the dinner become toast and soup. Slowly they learned that love did not require every feeling to be reasonable before it could be spoken. It required kindness in the speaking. A month after the kitchen table conversation, Jonah moved back in. No grand gesture, no rose petals, no dramatic airport confession. He came home with 2 bags, a tired smile, and a new basil plant for the balcony. Mira looked at the plant and told him it was brave of him to bring another victim into her care. He said, "This one came with a watering schedule." She laughed. The laugh was small, but it was real. They put the basil beside the dying mint and stood there on the balcony under a pale evening sky, not touching at first, then leaning shoulder to shoulder, the way they had under the umbrella years earlier. That was when Mira understood something important. They were not returning to the old relationship. They could not. Too much had been said. Too much had been revealed. The innocence of assuming love would naturally know what to do was gone. But maybe that was not a loss. Maybe mature love begins when the fantasy of being effortlessly understood finally breaks and 2 people decide to learn each other on purpose. Months later, their friends would ask what saved them. Mira never knew how to answer simply. It was not love alone. Love had been there during the worst of it, aching under all the wrong words. Love alone had not stopped them from hurting each other. It was not one apology. They apologized many times, and none of those apologies mattered until behavior began changing around them. It was not jealousy. Jealousy nearly destroyed them. It was not Adrian or Sophie, though both had revealed something important. The attention of someone else had shown them how lonely they had become, but it also forced them to ask whether they wanted newness or repair. What saved them was the conversation they had avoided for months, the one where no one won, the one where both had to admit they had been hurt and had also caused hurt. The one where Mira had to say she was afraid of being forgotten, and Jonah had to say he was afraid of being impossible to love when he was failing. The one where they stopped arguing over symptoms and finally touched the wound. A year after they almost broke up, it rained on the anniversary of the day they met. Jonah remembered. That mattered. Not because romance lives in perfect memory, but because attention is love made visible. He brought home 2 paper bags from the old bookstore, each with 1 second-hand book inside. Mira made soup, the same mushroom soup from the night of the first terrible fight. This time, when Jonah was delayed by 20 minutes, he called before the delay became silence. Myra smiled when she saw his name on the phone, not because waiting had become easy, because being remembered had become real again. They ate at the kitchen table with the good bowls. The old jar of notes sat between them, no longer dusty. They had started using it again, but differently now. The notes were less idealized, more honest. Thank you for telling me you were scared, instead of pretending you were angry. Thank you for coming home tired and still asking about my day. Thank you for not making me chase you through silence. Thank you for forgiving the first draft of my words. After dinner, Mira took out a blank paper and wrote one more note. She folded it and dropped it into the jar before Jonah could read it. Later, after she fell asleep, he opened it. It said, "We almost left because strangers made us feel heard. I am grateful we became brave enough to hear each other." Jonah sat in the dim kitchen for a long time with that paper in his hand. Then he wrote one of his own. "I thought love meant being strong enough not to need reassurance. Now I think love is learning how to ask without shame and answer without resentment." He placed it in the jar and turned off the light. Their love did not become perfect after that. That would be a lie. They still had tired weeks, still misunderstood tone, still carried old fears into new moments. Sometimes Mira still heard distance where Jonah meant exhaustion. Sometimes Jonah still heard disappointment where Mira meant longing. But now they knew how to stop before the story in their heads became louder than the person in front of them. They learned to ask, "Is that what you meant? Are you pulling away? Or are you overwhelmed? Do you want advice, comfort, or just someone to sit with you? Did I hurt you? Or did I touch something that was already hurting?" Simple questions, difficult questions, questions that saved small wounds from becoming endings. And Adrian, he remained a kind man who had arrived at a lonely moment. Mira saw him occasionally at the framing shop. There was no bitterness, no secret ache. He had offered attention, and she had learned from the hunger it awakened. That was all. Sophie stayed Jonah's colleague. He respected the line he had chosen. Over time, he became less afraid of admitting stress at home, which meant he no longer needed work friendships to carry what he refused to share with Mira. That was the quiet victory. Not avoiding every temptation. Understanding what the temptation was trying to tell them before it became a betrayal. Because sometimes the person who appears when you are lonely is not the enemy of your relationship. Sometimes they are the mirror showing you what has gone missing. The danger is not that someone else listens. The danger is when you decide it is easier to be understood by a stranger than to be honest with the person you love. Mira and Jonah did not stay together because leaving was wrong. Sometimes leaving is the bravest and healthiest choice. Some relationships are not wounded, they are unsafe. Some people do not misunderstand you, they diminish you. Some apologies are only performances designed to reset the cycle, but that was not their story. Their story was about two people who still loved each other but had let fear translate too many moments. Two people who had mistaken bids for care as criticism. Two people who had confused silence with peace, busyness with devotion, pride with protection. They chose to stay because when they finally sat down, the truth was still alive between them. Hurt, yes. Bruised, yes. But alive. And living things can heal when they are cared for consistently. That is a lesson their love left behind. Do not wait until the cold dinner becomes proof that you are unloved. Do not wait until the missed call becomes a whole story about abandonment. Do not wait until a stranger's attention feels like oxygen before admitting you have been lonely. Say the small thing while it is still small. Say that you missed the voice notes. Say that you felt foolish waiting. Say that silence scares you. Say that you are tired but still here. Say that work is frightening you. Say that you need reassurance, not because you are weak, but because love is not supposed to be a guessing game where both people lose. And when the person you love speaks, listen for the fear under the words. Sometimes anger is asking, "Do I still matter to you?" Sometimes distance is asking, "Can I fail and still be loved?" Sometimes jealousy is asking, "Have I already lost the place that used to be mine?" Sometimes a fight is not the end. Sometimes it is the smoke alarm, not the fire itself, but the warning that something precious needs attention before it burns. Mira and Jonah almost ignored the alarm. They almost let pride pack the bags. They almost let loneliness choose the easier voice. But on one rainy Sunday, they sat at the kitchen table and did the thing that sounds simple until you have to do it. They told the truth without trying to win. And because of that, their love did not return to what it was. It became something harder to break. Not because it was untouched, because it had been tested, named, repaired, and chosen again with open eyes.